The purpose of this video today is to take a look at metabolism and to explain what metabolism is, as well as to look at a few different examples of metabolism or metabolic processes in the human body. Metabolism is defined as the sum of all chemical reactions required to support cellular function and hence the life of an organism. All of our body's processes, whether it be ones that we're aware of, such as moving our muscles, or the ones we're not aware of, such as our digestive tract, such as our nerve cells, muscle cells, etc., communicating with each other, those all rely upon chemical reactions through metabolism. So metabolism is extremely important for the thriving of an organism. There's two different forms of metabolism, those being catabolism, performed by catabolic reactions, and anabolism, performed by anabolic reactions. There's a few differences between these two, the first being what they do to a molecule. With catabolic reactions, these are going to be breaking down molecules. In other words, we're going to take a larger molecule, and we're going to be breaking it down into much smaller units. Whereas with anabolism or anabolic reactions, we are doing the opposite. We're taking those smaller molecules and we're then converting them to larger molecules. There's also a difference when it comes to energy between these two reactions. With catabolic reactions, we're going to be releasing energy. That releasing of energy then can be used in anabolic reactions, which with anabolic reactions, these are going to be using, or in other words, consuming energy. A few simple examples that we can look at involve our proteins and amino acids. So our digestive system, it involves a lot of different catabolic reactions, one of those being taking proteins, which is our larger unit from our foods, and breaking it down into those individual amino acids. However, our bodies are extremely efficient when it comes to reusing amino acids. So we're then also, through anabolic reactions, able to take those individual amino acids and create new proteins, completely new proteins than maybe what that amino acid was used for before. So we're able to take those small amino acids and create this larger molecule or this new protein. Depending on the nutrient or the molecule, we're going to have different anabolic and catabolic pathways, which we can see here in this figure that comes from your book. Now, your book runs through a few different examples of catabolism. All of those, though, there's no picture representation, and I could see where for students, the wording might have been a little confusing. So I wanted to break those down for you, a little more simplified, and to give a picture to hopefully better represent what's happening. You're not going to need to know these exact processes. So each of these 10 steps in the case of glycolysis, you do not need to know that. If you're moving on to an advanced nutrition class, yes, then you will need to know it, but for the purposes of this class, you will not need to know these processes. So what we're looking at right now is glycolysis. Whenever we see lysis as a suffix, that's going to indicate that something is being broken down. So in the case of glycolysis, we are breaking down glucose. As I already mentioned, glycolysis involves 10 different steps. And since this is energy producing, it's a catabolic reaction, our end product is going to be two molecules. So we have here molecule 1 of ATP and molecule 2 of ATP. So glycolysis is going to produce two molecules of ATP. We're also, as an end product of glycolysis, going to yield two molecules of pyruvate. As we can see here, pyruvate is a 3-chained carbon molecule. Now this pyruvate It can be used either for another catabolic reaction, which we'll take a look at that catabolic reaction in a second, or it can also be used for an anabolic reaction. With the pyruvate being used for a catabolic reaction, we're going to be taking a look at the citric acid cycle. The citric acid cycle, it's going to take that pyruvate molecule and it's going to break it down by removing one of its carbon chains, or I should say one of its carbon molecules, not its chain. So we release one of the carbon molecules, and that's going to give us acetyl-CoA. Now, acetyl-CoA, this can be found not only in carbohydrates, but also in fats and proteins as well. So the citric acid cycle is not just for glucose metabolism, but it's also for fatty acid metabolism and protein metabolism. Now, in the citric acid cycle, the acetyl group, so the acetyl group of the acetyl-CoA molecule, it's going to bind onto another 4-carbon molecule in order to create something called citrate. So we have the citrate molecule here, and then through a series of reactions, we're then going to get the end result of more ATP, or in other words, more energy. Two other important products that we will be taking a look at are the NADH molecule and also the FADH2. So now in this figure, we have our glycolysis, which occurs in the cytoplasm of a cell. We have the citric acid cycle, or it's also known as the Krebs cycle. This is performed in the mitochondria of a cell. And then our final reaction is going to be the electron transport chain. This also occurs in the mitochondria. So glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, citric acid cycle and electron transport chain both occur in the cell's mitochondria. Now, in this process, the electron transport chain is composed of 4 large multi-protein complexes, and these are embedded within the mitochondria itself. And the electron transport chain, it's going to take this NADH and this FADH2, and it's going to use those because they are high energy electrons in order to then, at the end of this process, which now we should know the answer to what's going to happen, since this is a catabolic reaction, we are going to form more ATP, more energy. Another end product of the electron transport chain is also going to be water. All right, so we've looked at catabolic reaction. Now let's take a look at an anabolic reaction. So the reverse of glycolysis, so the breakdown of glucose, is going to be gluconeogenesis, genesis being the creation of. So in this process, we are now going to be creating glucose. Now, the process is fairly similar, except in reverse order for glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, but there's just going to be some different enzymes that were used for glycolysis that aren't going to be used in gluconeogenesis, and vice versa. Remember that since this is an anabolic reaction, we are going to need to use ATP. So that's another difference between glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. Glycolysis, we are creating, or end product is going to be ATP, whereas gluconeogenesis is going to be consuming or using ATP in order to create this new molecule. Now, gluconeogenesis is going to be important when, for instance, there's low blood sugar in the body, either from low carbohydrate intake or from starvation, or when lactate, so after strenuous exercise, the body produces lactate. So if there's an accumulation of lactate, then gluconeogenesis is also going to kick in. So what happens, in the case of glucose at least, what happens when we have too much glucose in the body? There's 2 different things that can happen. The first being that glycogen is, or glucose, I'm sorry, glucose is converted to glycogen. And this is through glycogenesis. Again, genesis meaning creating. So we're creating glycogen from this glucose. The glycogen, then, it's going to be stored in the liver. And for times when our bodies need more glucose, so, let's say the bloodstream has low blood glucose levels, the body then is going to break down that glycogen in order then for the body to have more glucose in its bloodstream. So then the cells can then use the glucose for energy. Or the other process that might occur is that it's converted to fat. Synthesis of triglycerides is going to occur via lipogenesis. And this fat then that's created from the glucose is then going to be stored as, or stored in adipocytes or fat cells. All right, so something you might be asking yourself is, so what does it mean to have a high or a low metabolism? How does that work into this conversation that we've just had? Well, when we colloquially say metabolism, what we're actually talking about is our metabolic rate. Now, we actually are not going to be discussing metabolic rate in this particular lecture. However, in our weight management lecture, we will be discussing metabolic rate and what that means for us and things that influence our metabolic rate. So again, that discussion is going to be continued later on. And that is the end of this particular presentation that I have for you today.